Will this new TV series actually give you goosebumps? Well, let's talk about it. If this is your very first time on the channel, well then definitely most welcome. This is All Hallows Cleave, your one-stop shop for everything involved with horror. My name is Kyle, and tonight we're going to be talking about something that I really didn't have that much expectations for, because what does the world need again? Yet another reboot of a classic beloved series, right? But boy was I wrong, because Goosebumps The Vanishing is actually pretty good. But the big question of the day, like always, is it scary? But you might be wondering how I determine if something's scary or not. Well, here are my categories that help me decide. First category being, is it good? Meaning the quality of what we're looking at. Acting, dialogue, cinematography, overall story structure, and just everything that makes a good movie or series good. Next, is it gory? Like, what are we talking? Are we talking the blood? Are we talking the ooze, the goos? All that kind of stuff that makes you in your seat. And third, is it Glandarphorlus? Which is a term that I've coined that is based off of the glandular fever, which is a viral disease that can be spread through close contact. But in this case, Glandarphorlus meaning, did it give me an infection? Am I still thinking about it after watching? Now you know how we do this, so let's get into it. Goosebumps The Vanishing premiered on January 10th, 2025, and you can watch the entire thing on Disney+. Now, it's not exactly season 2 of the 2023 remake, or if you want to call it a reboot, but basically Disney Plus has its own Goosebumps series. And even though Goosebumps The Vanishing is in the same vein as Goosebumps made in 2023, these are two entirely different stories with different characters that do not coexist. Meaning right off the bat, you do not have to watch the first series or season 1 of 2023 Goosebumps, which is kind of nice because I wasn't the biggest fan of 2023 Goosebumps. It was better than I thought it was gonna be, but I wouldn't rewatch it, you know? However, this time around, things are pretty different, for the better, honestly. David Schwimmer stars as Anthony Brewer, a botanist who works out of his basement in Brooklyn, New York, where his two kids, Cece and Devin, are about to spend an unforgettable summer at his house. We are also introduced to a full Goosebumps cast of characters known as Frankie, CJ, Trey, and Alex, who are all significantly more likable than the previous Goosebumps cast, and actually have relatable and, you know, real problems. Now, Anthony Brewer wants to have his kids to have a fun but also very safe summer, so he gives them one important rule, and that is to stay out of the basement. At first, things seem pretty chill, until the group of teens decide to check out an old fort, which was unfortunately the very last time Anthony Brewer saw his older brother after disappearing. And after years of lying dormant, an unknown evil is about to make absolute havoc throughout the streets of New York. But how is Anthony Brewer's lost older brother and all the super bizarre events happening in Brooklyn connected? So right off the bat, let's start with the first category. Is it good? Quality-wise, abso-freaking-lutely. Not only is there a major upgrade in the cinematography, but David Schwimmer does an absolutely excellent job as Anthony Brewer. And I would say for the most part, most of the teen kids actually do a pretty good job as well. There were a couple of divided moments where I was like, the line delivery was, but honestly, nothing to complain about with a Disney Plus show, you know? And as far as the story, this one just seems to work better than 2023 Goosebumps. I liked the way in 2023 where they all kind of combined all the different stories in the anthology series with the camera, the mask, the cuckoo clock of doom, but it just felt so set up, like, oh, you stumble upon a basement and then just everything's there. Whereas in this run, Goosebumps The Vanishing, everything happens a little bit more organically, especially the way they integrate the stories that they actually use throughout the series. Now, obviously, Goosebumps The Vanishing is mostly based off of Stay Out of the Basement, R.L. Stine's second ever Goosebumps book published, which is probably top 5, definitely top 10 scarier ones throughout the series. Seeing your dad just kind of transform into a monster that not only had a really cool creature effect to it, but also it's kind of traumatizing seeing your dad just kind of bipolar switch attitudes and just rage out on you and scream. Like, yeah, the plant monster's scary and all, but I think it's scarier when the dad is just yelling at the kids and you're like, oh, what the heck? Now, I will say, that's not really what this does here. And I'm kind of okay with that, because Goosebumps The Vanishing does something very interesting with the stories that they take from. Because you'll notice right away that this is not a beat for beat retelling of the book at all. Like, it takes the basement, it takes the botany stuff, it takes some of the plant monstery growth things, uses all of that, and then molds into its own story, which I am very much here for. Because if I wanted a retelling of the books, I would just watch the 90s show. And I sincerely applaud them for not just trying to reboot and recreate the 90s show at all. Because watching the show, you really gotta not compare the books and the original 90s show with this series. It's not the same thing, it stands on its own, and seeing them adapt stories like The Haunted Car, Monster Blood, The Girl Who Cried Monster, The Ghost Next Door, and even one which I thought, how in the world are you gonna do this, was Camp Nightmare. So as far as, is it good? It gets a 7 out of 10 for me. Now let's move on to the gore. And yeah, I was actually very surprised how kind of gory it was. So like in the original 90s Goosebumps, they had moments of slime, but never really moments of like blood, you know? And while there's not really a lot of blood per se in this, there are some pretty interesting body horror moments. You literally have an entire scene where David Schwimmer not only has worm and tentacle things crawling out of his arm, but a freaking growth pops up and he actually like slices and dices out and pulls the whole thing out. And I'm like, oh my God, wow. I was not expecting that. You also have one really good looking sludgy planty kind of monster running around in the first couple episodes too. And the way that it's kind of ended is also interesting. Now, gore doesn't always determine if something's scary or not, but in my opinion, if it makes me squeam a little bit, then it gets some points. So as far as gore, I would give this a 4 out of 10, which seems low in retrospect, but the fact that it actually gets points in a Goosebumps series on Disney Plus, that's pretty good. Now, finally, is it Glandarphorlus? So did I contract a viral infection that I probably should talk to my doctor about? I would say, yeah, kind of. Look, one main reason that this series sticks with me so much is that it's perfect gateway horror. Meaning that if you're not a fan of horror, but you kind of want to get into it, or maybe your kids or younger adults want to get into horror and you want something to start them off with, this is perfect for that. Just like how the 90s Goosebumps was perfect for getting the young adults into horror. And even though that this isn't the same thing, it does the same thing, specifically for a modern audience. I went into this series not only being a massive fan of the 90s Goosebumps show and obviously the books, with also very little expectations for this to be really good at all. And you know what? It's always a good day when you're pleasantly surprised with a piece of media in 2025 now. It is not a perfect series by any regards of the mean or whatever, but it gets the job done and it knew what it wanted to be. And that's a fun little Halloween show that most of the whole family can watch together. So is it Glandarphorlus? Honestly, yes it is. It gets a good like 6 out of 10 for me, which gives this the status of like a cold sore. It ain't gonna kill you, but it's gonna remind you every single day that it's there and we can see it. Now my final thoughts. Honestly, this series was just a lot of fun. Is it worth buying an entire month's worth of Disney Plus? Yeah, I would say yes, honestly. The New York setting mixed with the more likable characters, mixed with the more interesting books that they chose to integrate into the story. I not only think that the series blows away the 2023 version they did on Disney Plus, but I really sincerely hope they make more of these, because they did such a good job making something that's not an anthology feel like an anthology. Come to think of it, this feels like a good young adult version of Trick or Treat. A bunch of different stories that have a really good combination and overarchingness to them. And at the end, for the most part, everything gets tied up in a nice gelatinous, gross, slimy bow. Even though with the end, I still do have some questions. Not necessarily the reason, because the reason things are going on is very cool. The why, on the other hand, that's the only one of my issues with the series. You get the reason explained, but not necessarily why the reason is because of, yeah. Unfortunately, I don't think it's ever gonna get addressed, but it's kind of okay. I mean, it gets a little weird towards the end, but like weird in a good way. It took an interesting direction, which I didn't think it would take, and I'm okay with it. But more importantly, it made me want to go back and watch the entire classic 90s series and also reread some of the books. Especially Stay Out of the Basement, and if it's as creepy as I remember. Now, if y'all want to know about a book that was absolutely creepy that I read recently, it's called Fantastic Land, and you can watch my review of it literally right here. But what do you guys think? Did Goosebumps The Vanishing actually give you goosebumps? And were you a fan of the good old 90s series and books like I was? Well, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below and what I should talk about next. See you, everybody.